Open source is important to government as it gives us a new business model for how do we do collaborative software development. And software development itself turns out to be important because we recognize the sort of age of the internet that software is how we codify knowledge, right? And we do things, we increasingly automate those things as we have networks and computers. And so as we figure out how do I solve a problem, that gets codified as software. And being able to do that in a collaborative fashion is sort of the essence of open source, right? So open source software is about how do I do collaborative software development. If we're doomed to just using somebody else's software, we can never really capture the knowledge of how do we do business. And how do we do that? How do we automate it so we don't have to have human beings doing it? We can leave to the machines the things that we've already figured out and how do we commoditize. So to me, that open source software is about agility and being able to deliver capabilities and to be able to automate the processes that we deliver for the government, for the nation. There's so many ways in which we use open source. It's not an easy question to answer. We did a study in 2003, 10 years ago, where we chartered the MITRE Corporation to go out and say, where are we using open source? And they found it was everywhere, right? In mission critical command and control systems, information assurance, across the map, logistics. So some interesting stories of how we're doing it, and particularly effectively, is really being able to drive commoditization of pieces of our workflow. I've been involved in a project called the Ozone Widget Framework, originally developed by the National Security Agency. They had a problem. They have lots and lots of different sources of data, systems that process that data and make it visible to analysts to support their intelligence mission that were all different stovepipes. So they developed, their management said, we need some way of bringing these things together and not letting them just keep drifting farther apart. So they got some very smart systems architects together who said, well, the web is a pretty good integration platform. What if we built a framework in which we could get people to expose the capabilities that their different stovepipes provide in a single place? And so they wrote that. And so that was great for NSA. The open source thread was, they started giving copies of that out at conferences. Other intelligence agencies picked it up. Defense agencies started picking it up. Suddenly everyone was using this. And that was good. Still wasn't open source. The problem being, look, I may take your software as a consumer. I can go instantiate it. I can use it. It meets my needs. But sooner or later, I'm going to find either a defect in something I could make better, or I'm going to have the insight in how the feature that it doesn't have, and I'm going to want to contribute that back. And being able to do that means I have to have the source code. I have to have the people and the process and the technology to be able to submit my changes back so that we're working off a common baseline. We're not all diverging and reinventing the wheel in every different place that we're using this. Open source is a model for how do I do open government in the field of software development. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, I really believe that software development is a fundamental thread of how humans do business these days in terms of automating the knowledge that we have of how we execute processes and get business done. So that's one example that I've personally been involved with, but there's lots of others where we're taking things and instead of just hiring defense integrators to build us systems, we're recognizing we need to separate out the software development aspects and how do we capture those things for reuse. We've been tilting in this reuse of software windmill for 30 years. Right? I have this wonderful DoD instruction that's in the old typewriter font from 20 years ago that said we're going to reuse all the software we develop, and we're going to do it by sending it down to this GSA managed center, and which is going to be self-profitable, right? Because they're going to sell the source code back to other government agencies. We don't do that anymore. But we've been trying for a long time. Meanwhile, the internet came up, and the Free Software Foundation and the Apache Foundation and the Eclipse Foundation, and people have been doing it on the internet in ways that actually have delivered billions of dollars of value. A colleague of mine tried to do an estimate of what it would cost to develop Red Hat Enterprise Linux if you went out and contracted for it. Give or take or so, his estimate was that To go out and contract to go develop something like that would cost about $10 billion, right? And yet I can go out and I can download all the source code for free, right? So there's tremendous ability to deliver efficiency because we don't have to keep reinventing that wheel. So the main trend that I would see in terms of open source in government at this point is moving from a consumer to a collaborator, in the sense that we've been using open source for years. We've recognized that that's a valuable part of our software stack, and that the commoditization of software, that instead of going out and buying bespoke software that's custom crafted just for one specific mission, and being able to take a bunch of open source components and combine those together, that's been very valuable. The next wave for the government is figuring out how do we participate in that? How do we take the things that we developed and release them as open source, and why would we do that? Because that educational process that says, being able to take things and something that solves a unique problem at DoD, wait, as it turns out, it's not unique after all, because the intelligence community has that same problem as Department of Energy, as the Department of Veterans Affairs, as commercial entities, right? So how do we take this software that we created to meet a specific government function at one agency and share it both with other government agencies and with the private sector and with academia, is where I see us going next, right? And we're trying to crack the people, process, and technology that's necessary to make that a reality. We've done it in some cases. It's not the default yet. We're trying to figure out how do we get that ingrained into the culture to recognize, which really lines up with this overall trend towards open government. Open source software is just open government in the software arena. And it's one area where we've really had that example of the power of collaboration and the power of open that's come to us from the outside. This is not just about the government being open. This is the government learning what it means to be open from the rest of the world. Just do it. Go out, and open source software is out there. It has significant advantages from a agility standpoint. In many cases, it has cost advantages from a licensing cost, from a maintenance cost. Not always, right? So choose the software that best meets your mission needs, but think through the total cost of ownership in the life cycle and the opportunity cost of choosing a proprietary solution where you're going to be beholden to a single vendor and you're going to not have access to the ability to innovate on top of that platform. So think through those things before you make your decisions, and recognize that you can collaborate and you can contribute back to a commons that benefits us all.